I'm Mark Anderson, the Director of Education here at Domus Academy. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us online. This talk is part of Disrupting Patterns, a series of multidisciplinary, cross-cultural, and connected lectures with panels, talks, and conversations that touch on various disciplinary areas: architecture, design, fashion, innovation, and technology, investigating and emphasizing approaches, processes, and contemporary and future themes, looking at the past, investigating the present, and preparing next strategies of engagement. The lecture series is intended as a container for a discussion of ideas, approaches, and conditions around the space of design. Each invited guest has in some way impacted and contributed through their work to this discourse, sometimes within their discipline and many times in connected, far-reaching spheres. The contribution of our guests may be through professional practice, work with the industry, or teaching, or even experimentation. Our guest this evening is working within the crossroads of technology and experience, exploring the implications of living and interacting with networked, smart, and autonomous systems. He has worked and collaborated with some of the most important practices within the sphere of interaction design, both in Europe and the Far East. He is co-founder of the London design studio, OIO. Please let me introduce and welcome Simone Rebaudengo. Welcome, Simone. Before I pass the stage to you, I'd like to leave the space to my colleague to introduce the theme this evening. Michele Aquila, our program leader in interaction design and service design. Michele.
Ciao Mark, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, but ciao Simone, welcome. Last time we met was in Milan for Interaction 20, and then all the pandemic arrived.
Yes.
So happy to see you again. I won't add much words after Mark, but I want just to introduce a bit the topic we will discuss today. So you define yourself as a real and fictional products designers. So your presentation will revolve around these topics, exploring what you did in collaboration with the Near Future Lab at the Dubai Museum of the Future. I don't know how much you can disclose, how much you can show. Hopefully we will have some anticipations, also because the museum opened yesterday.
Yes, correct. So I will share something. Okay. I don't have the final images, but I'm allowed to talk a little bit about the process. So
okay.
And it's the first time ever.
Yeah. And then also your experimentation projects in the field of artificial intelligence, how you co-design with artificial intelligence in your practice, also in the studio. And also at the end, we will have a Q&A session with our students. And that's all. I won't add anymore. You're welcome again. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark and Michele. I'm really excited to be virtually in this talk. Unfortunately, I mean, it would be nice to be in person, but you know, as you said, after 2020, it was a different thing. I'll just start to share my screen and have some images and slides and videos and things to basically help to talk through the topic of today. Let's see if are you this is the question of 2020. Are you able to see my screen? Can you hear me? Yes. You know, that's the most so I'm just gonna use them. And anyway, so today we're gonna talk a little bit about making futures, or in a way like how I'm somehow talking through my practice as a designer. I also like the confusion that it always comes when I say I'm a designer of real and fictional things. but that's kind of the best summary, the best way I managed to kind of compile that. But at the end of the day, I'm basically a designer. Actually, what I also want to talk about through this is that it's not that different what I do from anything anyway, what we do as normally as designers. Yeah, so as there is a lot of also like students probably connected, I'm actually gonna start with where I actually started. And probably one of the reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing is I remember the first day of product design in Torino, Politecnico. So I'm actually coming from Torino. One of the professors, and I don't remember who, and I don't know if they will ever want to be quoted for that. He said this sentence that really amazed me. We're basically at the time, and this is around 2010. Actually, no, 2009. Okay, yeah, I'm getting that old, but he said these things that the most sustainable product you'll ever design is the one that will never be made. And because at the time, I think a lot of stress was around, sustainability, circularity. Like nowadays, again, hopefully we are in that sort of mindset as designers. But for me, I almost took it a little bit as a thing to say, okay, whoa, nice. So I can actually make things that don't have to be made. And in some way, I always was interested since I started this, studying and working, looking at design and looking at examples from the past of designers and architects that actually were using design not necessarily as only a tool for problem solving, but more as a tool for like speculation, for creating questions, for making imaginaries and visions that will never even be possible to be made. People are Archigram, people like Super Studio, even the let's say the Italian masters of designs that were for instance in the 70s with a new domestic landscape, were kind of using design as a cultural tool to talk about possible ways of living, possible futures. So not only about solving problems, but having a point of view. And I really always been fascinated with people that never build things, or let's say never commercialized products. So again, examples from the past that I really enjoy, like Haus Rucker with making these crazy mind expander helmets that were actually not even working, but they were just props to talk about the possibilities of what technology could be, but using the language and the tools of design. So making things, making prototypes, using materials, creating experiences. So I always been somehow interested in this sort of dichotomy of like how much real things need to be for you to be a designer, and how can you, what does it mean to design something for a time that doesn't really exist, or for a near future or a further away future. And again, from the past, I take a lot, actually that's interesting, because when I start to talk about the future, but then I always go back to the past to start to talk about the future. And I've always been fascinated, and I think that's some sort of exercise that it's always nice to do, is to look back at, what were the futures in the past, like what do people imagine? And actually, like, those are the things that still influence our present imagination, our present future in a way. The idea of self-driving cars is something that it's already was in the 1920s. We already had visions of people, not driving and, watching TV. The difference is just that the technology and the things that you see are based on the imagination and what you have available at the time, but the kind of the core influence and vision is the same. Sometimes when you look at these images this is actually from the first part of the century, you even see examples of visionaries and futurists and designers that got it, and they kind of happened, and they actually predicted somehow what's going to happen. But I'm also actually even more interested in things that didn't happen. For instance, this is an example from 1920, where someone was basically talking about the possibility of just replacing your organs with mechanical parts so you didn't have to eat. Luckily, some of these futures don't happen, but again, it's really interesting to see how these are used in industry, in culture, and so on as a tool to create discussion and create imagination and so on. So, making future products, making future scenarios is a great instrument, is an instrument that is used by companies, is something that, designers are called to do. When I was a student, my dream was always to do projects, the future of whatever, because, it's something that really lets you imagine possibility, lets you break down from some of the boundaries. But at the same time, sometimes when you see these visions of the future, especially from, big tech companies, you have also the feeling that these things are not real. They live in a bubble, they live in a space that doesn't exist because, none of these people is real, everything works. The interfaces that you see are full of lorem ipsum. These are just extremely vacuumed vision that are not actually going to be the reality. And, as designers, of course, we can do this, but I think there is something else that is also more interesting to do in the realm of, making futures. So I'm really interested in almost like the opposite. So the messy, broken, and mundane reality of the future, because, things will not disappear. We will always have all things being there. Things will break. There's going to be issues, and we're going to have to solve them as designers. And designing a future thing or a future without thinking about these things is going to end up in some examples like those corporate vision that seems unreal. So I've always been interested in making questions and even actually try to solve questions that we don't even know that we will have to ask in the future. I think one of my favorite pieces of science fiction props is this instruction manual that is actually in 2001 Space Odyssey. There is a little moment in the movie where the main character goes towards the toilet, and there is actually a 10-step guide that someone designed and wrote how to use a toilet in zero gravity. And I find these are actually, the things that will happen. You will have to figure out how things, asking these questions, even though they're weird. And I'm also interested in, not necessarily always like the hero characters or the things that we know. We will have jobs and people that we don't know that they even exist or they will exist. Not necessarily looking at the hero use case or like a friend of mine, Nick Foster, talk about Bruce Willis in a movie, but, about guy in a bus stop or people that are just, on the side. So, when you look at this future vision, whether they're in sci-fi or whether are part of, like sort of design vision, what I'm always asking is that, if you have all this technology, all these things, but what is the life of that guy living in that place? What does he do? How does he buy things? How does he, what technology can he have? If it's, for instance, if he's not rich, does he have money and so on? And moreover, like, a lot of times we pass time thinking about, flying cars, self-driving cars, the sort of hero objects of the future. But what I'm always interested in is in looking at the, stuff in the corner, appliances, buttons, like how are all these things that actually you're going to interact even more in the future going to work? And, again, I always love these images of sci-fi because it's like, you have this life in the future, crazy new technology, but where is the stuff? Where is the trash bin? Where do you throw things? Where is your other clothes? And again, because those are the interesting thing to solve as a designer when you're thinking about the future. So, I'm interested in, things like instruction manuals, because, not always things are going to work. And actually, probably this is the best quote about this from Paul Virilio, which is, when you invent the ship, you actually invent also the shipwreck. So things will not work. We will need to figure out ways for people to understand when things don't work in the future too. So in some way, when I'm talking about future design fiction, speculative design, it's actually not that much about predicting or making a very solid understanding of what things will actually be, but it's more a way as a designer to anticipate, create questions, and actually materializing things today to then potentially have something in the future. So basically anticipating potential issues, figuring out new ways in which it can be through the actual tools of design. And in the past 10 years, I've done various things, basically using electronics, physical products to figure out how to work with technology companies to make new ways of looking, for instance, at smart objects or AI assistants. I even tried to create these scenarios in the form of mini movies, where basically I would create scenarios to talk about potential ways in which, for instance, products need to be trained in order to live with us in the future. I even experimented trying to do immersive VR installation in order to allow people to see what would be the life like if I was an object or a smart object. And recently, probably because I was also a bit tired of making a lot of prototypes, I even tried to create discussion and create this kind of futures in the form of fables about a more than human future. So in some way, what I did in this past is kind of experiment with every possible tool that I have in order to get people to see what other future we can have. As recently I co-founded a company called Oyo Studio with my friend Matteo Loglio. And what we're trying to do now is actually trying to bring all this sort of exploration about the future, exploration about technology, also as a practice, as having other designers working with us, working with clients, working with institutions. And in some way, the way we explain this is we take all these like uncertainties in the future and all this weird and complex technology that will come and turn them into products that, we say you've never seen before. It's kind of like the pitch, but also things that people can use. People can try and actually create potential, new tools, new products, and so on. This example here that you see is a project that we did with Google some years ago, where basically we took a really weird, complex algorithm that would generate music and actually turn that into a tool that musicians could use to see what actually is the implication of artificial intelligence in their practice. And for instance, now artists like Grimes are using these to also try to create music for the new album. So I'm gonna now just talk through some projects. Some of them are really old, and some of them are actually from my time still as a student, and some of the new stuff that also Michele talked about. But the first thing that I kind of want to share is this is a really old project now. It's almost 10 years ago, but it's kind of in some way encapsulates the way I then build up my understanding of what does it mean to kind of work at the intersection of technology, present, future, through the tools of design. And so it's kind of an example of making a real future thing for the first time. And at the time, this was around 2011. It was very early stages when everything should become connected. The people were talking about the Internet of Things. Actually, they were not talking about the Internet of Things. They were still talking about machine-to-machine intelligence. And I was a student, and I started collaborating with this little studio in London to look at, how can we explore new things that might happen if things are connected? What else could happen beside, connected things? And at the time, the connected world was actually something like this. This company, this architect I was working with is called Usman Haq. launched at the time the first sort of platform to connect things around the world. Basically, you could just put up a feed of your, I don't know, your sensor, and other people could use it to create some sort of, open network of things that are connected to each other. And what I was doing at the time was actually, thinking, okay, but what happens if things are connected, at the core? And I started experimenting and, building prototypes, and I connected 5 toasters to each other. I basically made them feel like know about each other, and also create a sort of like peer pressure between them. So as you see, as more objects are used, the other objects somehow have a reaction, and which is expressed in the lever to, they freak out, or they, it would change their behavior. So I was really interested in, okay, like if things are connected, their behavior might change. They know different things. This is a great exploration for me as a student. I'm learning electronics, but what will happen in the real world? How can I test it? So as I was by myself in this lab for weeks working on this, I actually decided to make a product, actually a product that didn't exist, for a service that didn't exist, which I called Addicted Products. So I built, I set up these 5 objects, these 5 toasters. They were all connected to each other online. And I started basically giving them to people and having them living in their house for a while. But the trick here was that, each of these toasters was online. So other people could apply for the possibility of getting this toaster. And so if one of them was used not enough, and there was a person free let's say in the network, a toaster could actually choose to go to this other person. And again, this was a great idea, but I had to make it work. I had to figure out, how would you code the happiness for an object? And I made these tons of code that I have no idea what it does, but computing peer pressure between objects, happiness of a toaster, and so on. And we ran it for real with the help of a few friends, pretending to be DHL people, to basically bring these objects around the city. Every time that an object was not happy enough to stay somewhere, we would basically take it and bring it somewhere else. And this got out of hand. I started receiving thousands and thousands of applications from around the world. I got an email from a grandma that felt lonely and wanted to have a toaster, and I had to reply to her that I couldn't send her, but it's the object that had to decide. I got bots asking for this. I even got people that wanted to bribe me to basically give me money so they could keep it. And this is crazy, but actually the interesting thing is that by bringing this sort of fictional or sort of future, or even because at the end it's a separate way in which like a parallel way in which objects should behave and a market should work into reality, is that you get real implication. People give you feedback, people get sad. And also because I was really bad, and every time someone would lose one of these objects, I would send this black plaque to remind them how bad they were as a user, as they basically lost an object that they couldn't keep, even a toaster. So for me, this, in a way, like making these things that are not from the present, but making them real, is really a way to actually test potential future. And, for instance, I don't want this to be a reality ever, or I would like this to be a reality in some other way, but no one would want like a nagging toaster that leaves you. But again, unless you build it, how can you know that this is not a good or a bad future? And recently, actually, I've been, it was a little bit of a weird, a different type of project, actually a dream project for mine. I'm going to talk about how do you actually make things for a very far away future. And around 4 years ago, I started this project together with a bunch of other studios like the Near Future Lab and a bunch of other people from around the world. to help basically the Museum of the Future to design the first immersive future experience. Basically, instead of having a museum, what they asked us was to create a scenario, a place where you would enter in the future 50 years from now. And my part especially, and I think this was kind of what was probably the most problematic thing, is like, how do you design something that not only lives in 50 years, but maybe it's something that is designed 50 years from now, or 30 years from now, or 20 years from now? And how do you actually create things today that have that sort of like span in time and it doesn't look fully like science fiction? So yeah, so 4 years ago we started, I mean, we didn't make the building, someone else made the building, but we started working on, you know, the very first massive scale fiction ever built. And you know, and I've never worked in like world building or movie where basically that's a world in which there is a sort of way of creating worlds, creating scenarios, and then creating particular, you know, artifacts and props. So we had to figure out how to pass from designing things for, you know, 5 years in the future to 50. So we kind of created our own tools. Like we created a history, a future history of design to figure out how things should be made depending on which year, because when you design something, actually when you see something in 2070 in fiction, that thing might be 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 50-year-old, 40-year-old. And how do you create, you know, like what materials, what brands, what styles, what was the design language of the time? And so we actually created a sort of huge document that took the history. So some other studio actually built a historical of politics and technology, and then we use that to create an history of aesthetics and design through this fictional future or past in a way. So, you know, how would, you know, the trend from now in 2020 change in 2030, and then in 2040 and so on, new materials. So, you know, we created even like fictional design movements like, you know, virtual baroque or you know, subaquatic aesthetics, or like, you know, the AI international style, with basically to help us create a set of patterns and thinking as well, not to design everything looking the same and looking like, you know, a video game. And you know, and once you create this sort of design world, then, you know, we started creating, you know, jobs, technologies, backstories of people, character that would be living in this space. You know, what do they do? What is their story? What is their, you know, ID? Because basically we're looking at, you know, future life in space. You know, how do you get there? Who are you? What do you do? And we created a catalog of around 50 to 60 objects of, you know, everyday life. You know, things from, you know, gloves to training balls for zero gravity to, you know, books about low gravity fitness, to sort of start creating a world of artifacts that would be okay and living in that time, but that would also be understandable today. And you know, and then also creating other things like, you know, advertisements, articles. We made a magazine. We made, you know, we sort of, you know, figure out what is the emerging culture and the discussions of that future that then would help us create these artifacts. And I can share just some of, you know, the early sketches, but, you know, we designed spacesuits when not only, you know, adult astronauts will live in space. So actually we have a kid suit, we have a dog suit. You know, we had to think about cultural artifacts. For instance, how do you, you know, pray in space? Like something like, because actually being in Dubai, we designed a compass that points to Mecca, but being in space is actually not anymore 2D. So you have to think, you know, what is a 3D Qibla, like a Mecca compass? And all the way down to even thinking through, you know, what is water? What is a water bottle? You know, if we have, for instance, water coming from asteroids, what would it be? What would be a packaging? And again, so basically creating a whole set of, you know, artifacts to help understand this future. And this is a little preview of what the experience looked like. It opened actually yesterday. And this is a video from Atelier Bruckner, which was the company that built together with other companies like Galleria 12 and other ones to build the full experience. So it's actually a spaceship where you arrive and there are a bunch of crazy interfaces, objects, stories, and so on and so on. And so right now, actually from yesterday, it's open. And if you are in Dubai, it would be like a pretty good experience. And yeah, so this probably was one of the craziest effort in terms of making future objects. But again, what is also interesting is as a designer is how much detail and you can put and how much then actually it needs to create something that is understandable, especially when you're talking about 50 years from now. It's something that it's really impossible to predict. So at the end of the day, using artifacts and objects that you still understand is a way to create a discussion. So, details, little things are the one that then help you understand, that you're actually experiencing a fiction. And I think, beside, I've been doing this sort of like more conceptual artifacts for museums, for exhibitions, and we work also with, a lot of companies trying to apply this sort of work to, product development and actually, developing new products. But right now, one thing that we are really interesting as well as a studio is not only thinking about future things, but actually how do we change the practice of designing product in the near future? And actually, the main thing here and the thing that interests me the most is that right now there is a lot of fears, a lot of discussion about new technology and, for instance, artificial intelligence, how it's going to change our practice, how it's going to change the way this design, will it take our job? But actually, until you start working with these things, you also don't realize, what is it actually the impact? Can an AI actually take the job of a designer? And that question is not even that interesting for me. Like I don't want to I don't really look at things like that binary where it's either good or it's either bad, but actually, how can we make something in between? And so in Oyo is probably the first design studio that we officially hired an AI as one of our studio partners. This is Robbie. Actually, this is a visualization of Robbie because Robbie is kind of is something in between a bot and in a set of algorithms, but he's actually a real sort of entity that we collaborate with in the studio. He lives on Discord. We have a bunch of different things that he can do, from quotes to jokes to giving us feedback on ideas. Robin itself has access to generating visual ideas, so actually generating ideas for products. And at the moment, he also has an Instagram feed for kind of creating its own social media feed. And again, here what is interesting for Robbie is a bit of an artifact to talk about what we see in the future coming as a design practice and as also product or digital designer is not necessarily being scared of this new technology, but actually embracing them to find ways of making future things in future ways. So right now we are exploring ways of how do you use all these like generative potential of artificial intelligence to create new ways of designing physical artifacts. How does the process change? How do you make decision? Am I making a decision by myself, or am I using another, let's say, technology and algorithm to support me making the decision? So we're kind of exploring a way to making physical products with the help and the collaboration of AI. And right now we're in the process of launching a few experiments and actually one product. But again, I'm not gonna show it, but what's interesting is like, it actually changes the way someone designs. Like it's not necessarily about designing yourself, but it's about creating, discovering things, using technology to create ideas and things that we don't even know. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is to not only do technology for technology's sake, but we're actually creating a whole pipeline of going from this sort of discussion with a generative tool all the way to craftsmen's. At the moment, we're also working in Italy with some pretty old school companies that are somehow embracing this idea of going from AI to artisan or to craftsman to create products in a new way. So I'm not going to show that much, but next month, if you follow us on Instagram or anything, we're going to release the first product that part of this sort of new way of designing that we call artisanal intelligence. And so, yeah, I mean, this was just like a very quick set of examples of work or ways in which someone can, a student or a practitioner can look at, what does it mean to design, products in the future, but with, making them real today. And, one thing that for me is really important is that sometimes you always hear these days, how, the future is something we hear a lot. And we even hear there is a term now of future fatigue. So people are tired of thinking about the future, or maybe there is no more future to think about because, everything has been invented. But, if for me, that's kind of one of the saddest things, because again, last year I went to actually, no, now it's 3 years ago, I went to an exhibition in the Design Museum where it was showing the future home, and all the projects were actually projects coming from, the 70s and the 80s. So we did really interesting provocations and, using design to show how, the future life could be in the past. And I think it's time now also to, again, to make new ones. Again, like especially as a student, I think, all this world is really interesting, especially because it's conceptual. You can make prototypes, you can make, things that might go in an exhibition. And again, that is interesting in itself to use, kind of think about future products as a way to create, portfolio pieces and everything. But, the design in itself doesn't live in a museum. And, it's only interesting if it's, experienced by someone. So, all these things like critical design, design fiction, it's just a really good stretching for your mind. It's not, for me, at the moment, a practice in itself. Or, I mean, you cannot be a speculative designer, but you can be a designer with a really good, fictional split. And again, for me, what I learned through these years is it's not really, there is no recipe for this. There is no framework or job description or anything per se. But I think it's really important as a designer to have, again, this approach, this mindset to anticipate, to discuss, to propose, to question, and to hopefully, help us build a less boring and more interesting future. And that was it. I don't know if I went overboard on time.
I think it
was
perfect.
Absolutely perfect. If I can just jump in for a first comment, just to say I really appreciated your introductory slide of the experimental architecture collective archigram, the plugged-in city. And so you're sort of tying your work into a long tradition of speculative design, design fiction, critical design as a practice. And you finished up by saying that's part of the work, but it's not just the speculative. It's just tying it into real things, right?
Yeah.
Even with conceptual. Can you talk about just a little bit about the connection between what you get out of doing the conceptual, doing the speculative, some practical examples, you know, of how that influences. I know your whole talk has been basically about this, but but
no, yeah, no, I think, but that's a good question, because I think that's what I would say, that what this type of, you know, the more I've been doing this type of work, because first it was, let's say, starting as a, you know, student creating his own practice, to then having these projects being published and everything. And then somehow someone told me that it was design fiction, but I didn't necessarily know. So then I said, okay, yeah, I'm doing design fiction. And you know, in my experience, because I also, you know, I worked a lot, actually my background, I worked for like 5 years with like frog design. Like I was working on you know, big new digital products, physical product. And then I worked for 2 years with BMW Design Works, working on, you know, future cars and all of that. And I think what I realized sometimes is that people don't ask enough questions. And, you know, we give for granted a lot of things about the future, because I don't know, oh, that's going to happen. You know, oh yeah, you know, people are not, you know, people are still going to buy cars. And I'm like, okay, sure. But, you know, what if not? Like, how can we, you know, open up the discussion? And actually that sort of like, it's a bit tiring, because, you know, I'm constantly making questions to myself, but is that going to work? But that's actually opening up for you mental space to imagine possibilities. You know, because when people say, oh yeah, of course, everyone is going to have AR glasses in the future, then, and you say yes, then, you know, you're blocking in a way your let's say creative mind to be able to think about something else. Sometimes it's very helpful to think of, oh, if that doesn't work, then what happens? And then, you know, using that sort of critical thinking to find solution for still a product that you want to launch, but by thinking about, you know, the pitfalls, the completely weird side cases, you might find something unexpected. So in practical terms, it's really for me, it's every single project, I approach it in the same way, whether it's an AR app or it's, you know, a toaster, or it's, you know, a spacesuit for kids in 2070. It's kind of the same for me in a way.
Okay, so it's kind of a methodology, which is where you're stretching the boundaries of the creative process.
Yeah, no, we're discussing a lot this. So I think because I took a lot of inspiration from, for instance, there are the great fathers of design fiction. It's like Near Future Laboratory, and there are some, you know, some amazing minds, and they, you know, for instance, they were the first talking about design fiction as a practice and a framework. And again, there is a methodology, there is like steps. But again, for me, it's more of it's a mix of a framework and just a mindset.